She set it at the coffee machine on a Tuesday morning, stirring oat milk into a cup she wasn't going to drink, and she said it the way you'd mention the weather, casual, tossed off, almost bored. I barely wear anything at night anymore. The heat in my building is broken again, and my landlord is useless, so I just, She shrugged one shoulder, smiled, took a sip, walk around in almost nothing, hope the neighbors aren't looking. And she looked right at me when she said it. Not at the cup, not at the window behind me, at me, with a flicker of something behind her expression that wasn't embarrassment and wasn't flirtation. It was closer to a chess player moving a piece and watching to see if you noticed. I laughed. Because what else do you do when a coworker says something like that at 8:45 in the morning in an open plan office where 3 other people can hear? And I said something stupid like sounds rough, and walked back to my desk and sat down and stared at my monitor and thought, she knows. She knows I can see her apartment. And the thing that made my throat go tight, the thing I couldn't explain until it was almost too late, was that she'd known since before she moved in. My name is Ethan Hale. I'm 31. I worked, I should say, though the tense of that verb is part of the story, as a senior digital strategist at a company called Luma Collective in Boston, mid-sized creative agency, big enough to have real clients, small enough that everyone knows everyone and the office politics have nowhere to hide. I'd been there 3 years. Decent reviews, 1 promotion. The kind of steady trajectory that doesn't make for dramatic storytelling, but felt at the time like it was building towards something. I lived alone in a 4th-floor walk up in Somerville. A narrow 1-bedroom with a kitchen the size of a prayer and a single window in the living room that faced, across a courtyard about 40 feet wide, directly into the apartment across the way. This is common in Boston. Old triple-deckers and converted brownstones stacked together with courtyards between them that are really just air shafts with ambition. You get used to it. You learn not to look. You keep your blinds mostly closed, and you assume your neighbor does the same, and you develop the urban skill of seeing without registering, which is really just a polite form of lying to yourself. In August, someone moved into the apartment across the courtyard. I knew because I heard the furniture scraping and saw the lights go on for the first time in weeks. The previous tenant had been a quiet older man who kept his curtains drawn and was essentially invisible. The new tenant was not invisible. The new tenant was Sienna Marsh. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know she worked at my company. I didn't know anything except that on the first night she moved in, the lights in her apartment came on at 10 p.m., and the blinds were up, and she was standing in her living room in a tank top and shorts, unpacking boxes, and I looked away. Because that's what you do. You look away. You close your own blinds. You pretend the geometry of city living doesn't occasionally put someone else's private moments 40 feet from your face. I closed my blinds. I went to bed. I told myself it was fine, new neighbor, move-in night. Everyone's oblivious to their own windows when they're exhausted and surrounded by boxes. I'd been that person once. You don't think about sight lines when you're trying to figure out which box has the sheets. But the next night, same thing. Lights on, blinds up, her silhouette moving through the apartment like she was the only person in the world. And the night after that. And the one after that. Every single night, the apartment across the courtyard was lit up and open, and she was in it, and my blinds were closed, and I was in mine pretending I couldn't see the warm stripe of light leaking through the gap at the frame. I told myself it was a privacy standards difference. Some people close their blinds, some people don't. New York transplants especially, I'd heard they get used to being visible. The fishbowl culture, the buildings so close you could pass a cup of sugar without stepping outside. It wasn't my business. Literally, it was not my business what she wore or didn't wear in her own apartment. I repeated that to myself like a mantra, closed the blinds tighter, angled my couch away from the window, and moved on with my life. That should have been the end of it. 2 weeks later, a new hire started at Luma Collective. Sienna Marsh, digital strategist. Same department, same floor. Same pod of 8 desks arranged in a loose circle around a shared charging station in the middle of the open plan. She sat 4 desks from me, close enough that I could hear her laugh when someone said something funny, and a stand close enough to see the small silver ring she wore on her right index finger catch the overhead light when she typed. I recognized her the moment she walked through the door on her first day, and the recognition hit me like a slap. The shape of her, the way she held her shoulders, the specific tilt of her head. The woman from the apartment. My neighbor. The one with the open blinds. I didn't say anything. What would I say? Hey, I accidentally saw you through your window while you were unpacking. Welcome to the team? No, you say nothing. You file it under awkward coincidence and move on, and hope she doesn't recognize the sightline the way you did. She introduced herself to the pod that first morning, shook everyone's hand, got to me last, extended her hand, smiled, and said, "Sienna, I'm really looking forward to working together, Ethan." She already knew my name. I told myself that was normal. The onboarding packet probably listed the team. The office manager probably mentioned it. There were 20 reasonable explanations, and I chose the most reasonable one because the alternative was admitting that something about the way she said my name made the hair on my arms stand up. "Welcome," I said. "You'll like it here." That was a Monday. By Thursday, the thing I couldn't explain had already started. Her blinds were always up. Every night that week, I'd come home from work, walk into my living room, and there it was, her apartment, lit up across the courtyard like a diorama. She moved through it freely. Tank tops, sports bras, shorts that barely counted, sometimes just an oversized t-shirt that ended mid-thigh. She never looked toward my window. She never seemed aware of the sightline at all. She just lived, openly and unselfconsciously, the way you live when you believe no one is watching. Except she was 40 feet away, and my window was right there. I kept my blinds closed. I turned my couch so it didn't face the window. I started changing in the bathroom instead of the bedroom, which didn't even face her building, but felt necessary anyway. Some irrational compensation, like my own modesty, could cancel out the exposure happening across the courtyard. But here's the thing about blinds, cheap ones. The horizontal plastic kind that came with the apartment. They don't block everything. They angle, they shift. And if you're walking through your own living room at 10 p.m., to get a glass of water, you catch a slat of light through the gap, and the slat of light contains a person, and your eye registers the person before your brain can stop it. It takes a quarter of a second. You look away. But you saw, I hated it. I want you to understand that. I hated the geometry, hated the feeling of involuntary intrusion, hated that I was becoming hyper-aware of my own window in my own apartment. I thought about buying blackout curtains. I thought about rearranging the furniture again. I thought about mentioning it to her at work, casually, neighborly. "Hey, funny thing, I think we live across from each other. You might want to close your blinds." But every version of that sentence sounded worse than silence. So, I said nothing. I looked away when I caught a slat of light. I told myself it didn't matter. Then Tuesday morning happened, and she stood at the coffee machine and said, "I wear almost nothing at night," and looked directly into my eyes, and I understood that she already knew exactly where I lived. Hope the neighbors aren't looking. The first person I told was my friend Devin. Devin Park was a graphic designer on a different floor, someone I'd known since college. The kind of friend who says exactly what he thinks with the delivery of a man who has never once worried about being liked. I caught him in the stairwell during lunch, which was our unofficial place for conversations we didn't want overheard. "She knows we're neighbors," I said. "She made a comment about it this morning." Not directly. She didn't say my name or my address, but she looked at me when she said it, and it was obvious. Devin leaned against the railing. "So?" "She's your neighbor. She figured it out. That's not weird. She moved in 2 weeks before she started here, Dev. 2 weeks. What are the odds she just happened to move into the apartment directly across from mine right before joining my company? In Boston?" Those odds are actually not that bad. He was right. Statistically, probably right. The city's small. The agency's hiring pool draws from the same neighborhoods. Coincidences happen. I told myself that, the way I kept telling myself reasonable things, and I went back to my desk and I worked and I didn't think about it for the rest of the day. Until 5:30, when an email arrived from Sienna to the full pod, her first team-wide email, asking for a quick sync on the Q4 campaign calendar. Professional, normal, except at the bottom, under her signature, she'd included a line I almost missed. "P.S. Ethan, I think we might be neighbors." Small world. Let's grab coffee sometime and compare notes on the landlord situation. 8 people on that email. She'd announced our proximity to the entire team in writing. Casually, cheerfully, in a way that framed it as a funny coincidence, and simultaneously created a documented record that I knew where she lived, and she knew where I lived. My stomach turned. I didn't know why yet. But something in the back of my brain, the same instinct that had made me screenshot Devin's text chain when a project went sideways last year, told me to save that email. So I forwarded it to my personal account, and I saved a PDF, and I put it in a folder I labeled MISC. I didn't know it then, but that folder would save my career. The next 3 weeks were normal on the surface. Sienna was good at her job, sharp, fast with strategy decks, effortlessly articulate in client calls. The pod liked her. Our manager, a guy named Colin Bauer, who ran the digital strategy team with the exhausted precision of a man who'd rather be sailing, called her a great addition in our bi-weekly stand-up. She fit in. She was easy to work with. She remembered people's coffee orders and asked about their weekends, and did that thing where you make everyone around you feel slightly more seen, which is the most effective form of office charm because it doesn't register as charm at all. But at night, nothing changed. Her blinds stayed up. The apartment stayed lit. And 3 times in those 3 weeks, I came home to find her standing at her living room window, not looking at me, not acknowledging me, but positioned at the glass with her phone in her hand, angled slightly downward, the way you hold a phone when you're taking a picture of something below you or across from you. The 3rd time it happened, a Wednesday night, I was in my kitchen, which shares a wall with the living room, no window toward the courtyard. And I heard a sound from her side of the building. A camera shutter. The fake shutter sound an iPhone makes when you take a photo with the volume up. I heard it clearly across the 40 feet of dead air between us. I walked into the living room. My blinds were closed. But there was a gap. There's always a gap. A 2-inch strip where the blinds don't quite meet the frame, and through that gap, I could see her, standing at her window. phone raised, pointed at my apartment. She was photographing my window. I stepped back from the living room so fast I hit the hallway wall with my shoulder. I stood there in the dark with my heart slamming against my ribs and the taste of copper in my mouth. The taste of adrenaline, which I didn't know was a thing until that moment, and I tried to understand what I'd just seen. She was standing in her own apartment, in her own light, taking photos of my dark window. Not selfies, not photos of the view. Photos aimed at the gap in my blinds, the gap that showed my living room, the gap that, in those photos, stripped of context, would look exactly like a peephole I'd created on purpose. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the refrigerator, and I thought about every interaction we'd ever had, and I rearranged them. Not to find the innocent version, but to find the true one, and the true one was worse than anything I'd imagined. That's not a neighbor. That's a project. That's what Devin said the next day in the stairwell, and his voice had changed. The joking skepticism was gone, replaced by something harder. I'd shown him the email she'd sent, the PS line. I'd told him about the camera shutter sound. He leaned against the wall and said, "Ethan, what does she gain if she has photos of your apartment taken from hers?" I didn't understand the question. What do you mean, what does she gain? I mean, what's the story those photos tell? If someone looks at them later, out of context, what do they see? And then I understood. The photos wouldn't show her apartment with the blinds up and the lights on. They'd show my apartment with the blinds slightly open and a clear sightline into hers. They'd show a male coworker who, per her own documented email, knew exactly where she lived, whose window faced directly into her bedroom. The photos, removed from every piece of context I had, would tell the story of a man who was watching, not a woman who was performing, a man who was watching. I went cold. That weekend, I did something I probably should have done the day she moved in. I searched public records. Her lease. Sienna had signed a 12-month lease on the apartment across the courtyard on July 14th. Her start date at Luma Collective was August 5th. That meant she'd secured the apartment 3 weeks before starting at the company. Normal enough, you find a place before you start a job. Happens every day. But then I searched harder. I found the Luma Collective job posting she'd applied to. It was dated June 28th, 2 weeks before she signed the lease, and the apartment listing, I found it on a rental archive site, had been posted on June 30th. The timeline was job posting June 28th, apartment listed June 30th, lease signed July 14th, start date August 5th. She'd found the apartment 2 days after applying for the job, before she'd been interviewed, before she'd been offered the position, before she had any reason to move to this neighborhood at all, unless the neighborhood was the point. I sat on my couch with my laptop open and the rental listing glowing on the screen, and I tried to think of a reason someone would sign a lease across the courtyard from a stranger 2 weeks before starting at his company. A reason that wasn't the reason. My hands were shaking. I couldn't think of one. Then, I searched her name on LinkedIn, not her profile. I'd already seen that. Clean and professional. 3 years at a place called Redline Digital in New York. I searched for mentions of her name in other people's posts. And I found something that made me close the laptop and sit in the dark for a long time. A post from 8 months ago. Written by a man named Jordan Estes. It said, "To anyone who has been targeted by a colleague who manufactured a narrative to take your position, I believe you. I see you. You are not crazy. No names, no details." But in the comments, someone had written, "Was this about the Redline situation?" And Jordan had replied with a single word, "Yes." I messaged Jordan that night. He didn't respond for 2 days. Then, on Monday evening, my phone lit up with a call from a New York area code. "You work with Sienna Marsh," he said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "Because you wouldn't have found my post if you weren't looking for exactly what I wrote it about." Jordan Estes had been a senior digital strategist at Redline Digital in New York. Same title I held at Luma. Same level. Same department. Sienna had been hired as a junior strategist on his team. Within 3 months, she'd filed a harassment complaint against him. The complaint alleged that he had been surveilling her, watching her through a window at a coffee shop across from his apartment, taking photos of her during off hours, making comments about her appearance that created a hostile work environment. None of it was true, Jordan said, and his voice had the flat, exhausted quality of someone who'd said these words so many times they'd lost their texture. But she had documentation. Photos of my apartment that she'd taken from outside, screenshots of texts I'd sent her, normal work texts, about deadlines and deliverables, recontextualized as evidence of obsessive attention. An email where I mentioned we lived in the same neighborhood, which she'd prompted me to write by asking if I knew any good restaurants near her new place. She built the whole case out of ordinary interactions she'd engineered to look sinister in retrospect. What happened? I was put on administrative leave during the investigation. The investigation took 6 weeks. By the time it concluded, insufficient evidence to sustain the complaint, which is HR language for "we don't believe her, but we can't prove she lied." She'd been promoted into my role as an interim replacement. When I came back, there was no role to come back to. They offered me a lateral move to a different division. I took it. 3 months later, I was laid off in a restructuring that eliminated exactly one position. Mine, he paused. I could hear traffic through his phone, the sound of a city that didn't care about either of us. She didn't want me punished, Ethan. She wanted me moved. The complaint was never supposed to succeed. It was supposed to create enough institutional discomfort that the easiest solution was to remove me and let her step up. It worked perfectly. "The hearing is Thursday," I said, without thinking. Silence. "What hearing?" I told him. On Friday afternoon, I'd received a calendar invite from Colin, my manager, for a Thursday meeting with HR. The subject line said workplace concern, confidential discussion. No details, no context, just a time slot and a room number, and the sickening understanding that whatever Sienna had been building, it was finished. "Thursday," Jordan said. "That gives you 5 days." 4. It's Monday. "Then, you need to start. Tonight." I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with every light on, and I built a timeline on a legal pad. The kind of analog, physical documentation that can't be remotely edited or deleted. Which is a thing you start thinking about when you realize someone has been engineering your digital footprint. Here's what I assembled over the next 72 hours, and I want you to hear it clearly, because this is what saved me. Tuesday morning, first move. I went to the Somerville Housing Authority website and pulled the public record of Sienna's lease. Signed July 14th. I cross-referenced it with the Luma Collective job posting date, June 28th. I printed both documents. Tuesday evening, second move. I contacted my building's management company and requested the maintenance log for my apartment's window blinds. This sounds insane. It was insane. But the building had done a unit inspection in June, before Sienna moved in across the courtyard, and the inspection report noted that my living room blinds had a 2-inch gap at the frame due to mounting bracket wear. The management company had documented the defect and scheduled a repair that hadn't happened yet. I had proof, in writing, that the gap in my blinds was a maintenance failure, not a choice. Wednesday morning, third move. I called the rental archive site and requested a certified copy of the apartment listing across the courtyard, with its original posting date. June 30th, 2 days after the Luma job posting went live. Wednesday afternoon, 4th move. Devin, who I'd briefed on everything by this point, did something I didn't ask him to do and will never forget. He went through the office security badge logs. He had access because the design team used them to track after-hours studio time, and pulled the timestamps for Sienna's badge swipes. She'd entered the building after 6 p.m. on 4 separate occasions in the past month. Each time she'd gone to the 16th floor, where the HR offices were, not the 12th floor, where our team worked. The 16th floor. At 6 p.m., she'd been meeting with HR for a month. The Thursday hearing wasn't the beginning. It was the end. Wednesday night, the last move. I called Jordan again. I told him what I'd found. I asked him for something I had no right to ask for, a written statement. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'll write it tonight. Give me until midnight." "Why?" I asked. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." "Because nobody wrote one for me. Because when it happened to me, I didn't have a Jordan. I had a lawyer who charged me $300 an hour to tell me the investigation would probably clear me, and a therapist who charged me $200 to tell me I wasn't crazy. I would have traded both of them for one person who'd been through it and was willing to say so on paper." He paused. "And because she's going to do this again. If it works on you, she'll do it somewhere else, to someone else. And that person won't have a Devin, and they won't find my LinkedIn post, and they'll lose. That's what she's counting on, that the pattern never connects, because the people she does it to are too ashamed or too exhausted to talk about it." His statement arrived at 11:47 p.m. 3 pages. Single-spaced. Timestamped in the metadata of the PDF. It described, in careful and specific detail, exactly what Sienna Marsh had done at Redline Digital, the engineered proximity, the manufactured documentation, the complaint designed not to succeed but to displace. It included dates, names, and the HR case number from the Redline investigation. I printed it. I put it in a manila envelope with everything else. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. Thursday morning, 7:15 a.m. 1 hour and 45 minutes before the hearing. I was standing in the lobby of Luma Collective, waiting for HR Director Vivian Osei to arrive for the day. She came through the revolving door at 7:22, carrying a coffee and a leather tote, and the expression of someone who was not expecting to be ambushed by a junior strategist before she'd taken her coat off. "Vivian," I said, "I need to file a formal complaint before the 9 o'clock meeting, and I need it timestamped before that meeting begins." She looked at me. I could see her processing. The meeting she'd already scheduled. The complaint she'd already received from Sienna. The narrative she'd already been primed with over 4 secret after-hours visits. I could see all of it shifting behind her eyes as she recalculated. "Come upstairs," she said. "Bring whatever you have." We rode the elevator in silence. She didn't ask me what the complaint was about. She didn't ask me who it involved. She pressed the button for 16 and stood with her coffee in one hand and her tote in the other and said nothing, and I understood that she already knew. Maybe not the full shape of it, but enough to know that the 9 o'clock meeting she'd been preparing for was about to look very different than she'd expected. I respected her for not pretending otherwise. Her office was small and neat and smelled like the bergamot candle on the filing cabinet. She sat down, took the lid off her coffee, and said, "Start from the beginning." I gave her everything. The lease records, the job posting date, the rental listing with the June 30th timestamp, the window inspection report, the badge swipe logs, Jordan's statement, the email Sienna had sent to the pod, the one with the PS line that documented our proximity in a way designed to be entered as evidence later, and the PDF of that email that I'd saved on the first day, before I understood why I was saving it, back when my only thought was that something felt wrong, and the only thing I knew to do about it was to organize. Vivian read everything. It took 20 minutes. She didn't speak. When she finished, she set the manila envelope on her desk and looked at me and said, very carefully, the 9 o'clock meeting is postponed. Don't go to your desk. Work from the conference room on 14 today. I'll be in touch. Am I in trouble? No, she said. And then, more quietly, you're not in trouble, Ethan. I walked to the 14th floor conference room and sat in a chair that faced a blank whiteboard, and I put my head in my hands, and I stayed like that for a long time. Not crying, just sitting with the weight of it. The weight of being believed, which is heavier than you'd think. Because being believed means it was real, and part of you was still hoping it wasn't. The investigation took 2 weeks. I was interviewed once in person by an outside attorney the company retained, a man who asked me to walk through the timeline twice, and then asked me to do it a third time backward, which is apparently a technique for testing whether a narrative is rehearsed or remembered. I did it. It wasn't hard. The truth has a structure that rehearsal doesn't. It includes the irrelevant details, the serial dinners, the 2-inch gap in the blinds, the sound of a fake camera shutter across 40 feet of courtyard air. Devin was interviewed. He provided the badge swipe data and a written account of our stairwell conversations with dates and approximate times. 2 other colleagues in the pod, people I'd never confided in, independently told the investigator that Sienna had asked each of them, separately, whether they'd noticed Ethan paying a lot of attention to her. She'd been seeding the narrative in the team for weeks, planting the perception before filing the paperwork. Jordan's statement was entered into the record. He was contacted by the investigator's office and agreed to a phone interview. I don't know what he said. I know that afterward he texted me. First time anyone official asked me what actually happened. On the 8th day of the investigation, I got a call from the outside attorney. He said, "We've received a secondary complaint." My stomach dropped again. The feeling never gets less violent, no matter how many times it happens. Sienna Marsh has alleged that you coordinated with a former colleague of hers to fabricate a retaliatory narrative. Jordan, I said. Yes, she claims his statement is manufactured. We've reviewed it against the Redline digital HR records, which we subpoenaed. His account is consistent with their internal documentation. Her complaint has been noted and is not being pursued further. She tried to undermine Jordan's statement. Even from administrative leave, even with the walls closing in, she was still playing the game, still reframing, still repositioning, still trying to make the defense look like the attack. It was the last move of someone who understood that the machine she'd built only needed one more rotation to work. It didn't work. Sienna was removed from the company at the end of the 2nd week. The official internal communication called it a departure by mutual agreement. Her role was posted on the careers page the following Monday. I don't know if she was fired or if she left voluntarily, and I've accepted that I'll never know, and most days I can live with that. Some days I can't. Colin called me into his office when it was over. He sat across from me and looked uncomfortable in the specific way that managers look uncomfortable when they realize they almost participated in someone's destruction. He said, "I should have asked more questions." I said, "Yeah, you should have. You're not being moved. Your role is unchanged. Your file is clean." "Good," he nodded. We sat there for a moment in the silence of 2 people who have nothing left to say and too much left to feel. Then I went back to my desk, my same desk, in my same pod, 4 seats from an empty chair, and I opened my laptop, and I got back to work. Because that's what you do. You go back to the thing they tried to take from you, and you do it. Here's what I need you to understand, because the story is over, but the lesson in it is the part that actually matters, and if I don't say it clearly, the whole thing is just a thriller with a neat ending, and it's not. It's a warning. Sienna didn't almost succeed because she was brilliant. She was smart, strategic, patient, genuinely skilled at the work, which is what made it so disorienting, because competence and cruelty aren't supposed to live in the same person, but they do, all the time, every day, in offices you walk through right now. She almost succeeded because she understood the mechanics of institutional belief. Here's what she knew. A complaint doesn't have to be true to be effective. It just has to be first. The person who frames the narrative controls the narrative, and by the time the other person responds, they're not telling their story, they're defending against hers. Every piece of context they offer sounds like an excuse. Every piece of evidence they produce sounds like something they prepared because they knew they'd get caught. The architecture of a false accusation is designed to make the truth look like exactly what a guilty person would say. I wasn't watching her. She was building a window. That's the sentence I keep coming back to because it captures the inversion at the center of the whole thing. She created the sightline. She chose the apartment. She chose the blinds. She chose the lighting. She chose the outfits. She chose the coffee machine comment that put the image in my colleagues' heads. And then she photographed the sightline she'd built and presented it as something I'd created. The only reason I survived is documentation, not eloquence, not innocence, not the belief of my friends, though Devin and Jordan were essential. Documentation. The lease date. The job posting date. The window inspection. The badge swipes. The saved email. The PDF I made on the first day because something felt wrong and I didn't know what to do about it except organize. I learned that organizing isn't neurotic. It's the difference between a version of events and a provable one. I learned that the person in the stairwell, the Devin who listened when I didn't have enough evidence to convince even myself, might be the reason you're still employed 6 months later. And I learned that the stranger on the internet who wrote a vague, anguished LinkedIn post about being targeted, the Jordan who answered an unknown number from a city he doesn't live in because he recognized the search pattern of someone going through what he went through, that person's willingness to speak is worth more than any institutional process ever designed. Devin still works at Luma. We don't use the stairwell anymore. We go to an actual restaurant now, like normal people with normal problems. And sometimes we talk about what happened, and sometimes we don't. And both versions of lunch feel equally important. He never asked for credit. I give it to him anyway, every chance I get, because the world is full of people who see something wrong and look away. And he didn't look away, and that choice cost him nothing and saved me everything. Jordan moved to a different agency. We've never met in person. We text sometimes, short, practical messages, the kind that pass between people who share a specific and terrible knowledge. Last month he sent me a link to an article about workplace manipulation tactics and just wrote, "Sounds familiar." I wrote back, "Too familiar." That was the whole conversation. It was enough. The gap in my blinds was fixed 3 weeks after the investigation ended. A maintenance guy named Hector came and replaced the mounting brackets. It took him 11 minutes. He tested the blinds twice, snapping them open and closed, and said, "Should have been done months ago." I almost laughed. I bought blackout curtains anyway, heavy ones, the kind that turn a room into a cave. I hung them that same night, and when I stepped back and looked at my window, sealed, dark, completely private, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not relief, something quieter. The feeling of a door you can finally close all the way. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it for yourself, not for me. Have you ever felt something was wrong about a person everyone else seemed to trust? Not because they did anything you could name, but because the pattern of small, reasonable things they did added up to a shape that wasn't reasonable at all, and stayed quiet because you thought naming it would make you sound paranoid? And the person who finally said, "I see it too," the friend in the stairwell, the stranger who answered the phone. Have you ever gone back and told them that their voice was the reason you trusted yours? If this story hits something real, subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow with another one.